So welcome aboard, everybody. I'm joined by my mate Gav here, and Gav is like me. He's a Gulfstream dude, best aeroplane in the world. Gav's previous experience was flying C-17s for the military. He was in the military for 11 years. Came straight out, didn't want to go into the airlines, took a big risk to get his FAA license, got onto the Gulfstream, worked in Tokyo, and then has been over here in the UK, currently works for a company here in the UK, has worked for private families as well. And we're going to get some really good conversations about mindset, confidence, how it's affected by our emotional state, our spiritual state. And talking about emotional states, Gav, how was the outcome of the squirrel incident first thing this morning?
The squirrel incident relates to my dog. Now, clearly they have a very different mindset than we have on a walk in the morning. My Labrador is very driven by chasing squirrels, and he managed to take himself off after one. And he's usually very good at coming back. But after I'd been searching for him for over an hour today, I got a phone call from my girlfriend to tell me that he was actually back at home. So, yeah. I got an extra walk, and he got to hang out back at home. So, from a mindset point of view, he's probably very satisfied with himself this morning. And yes. I was quite high stress levels because I knew I had to get back to meet you. So. Yeah,
but it's odds law. I had the same thing with our dog yesterday. I had to go down and meet my dad and be there because he'd scheduled the refuse to go to the refuse centre, and you have to be there on time. And the dog knew that. They know that, don't they?
Every single time.
Yeah. Little swines. Good. We're always having our mindset tested. But Gav and I have been talking a little bit about some stories. He's got some seriously interesting stories, and I think you're talking a little bit about. For me, you told me that you were shot at in the theatre of war. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, it's not quite the daring do that you might imagine from tales from old, but we'd picked up a squadron of guys in northern Nigeria, and it was a very benign environment to us. We knew there were factions in the area that weren't with our best interests at heart, but we were pretty relaxed about this whole situation this afternoon. It was just another run-of-the-mill trip for us. So we picked these guys up and we were taxiing out. And one of the guys we had up on the flight deck, where there's mentioned there were a few guys across the other side of the airfield on motorbikes. And the guy I was flying with, an old and bold type, although there are no old and bold pilots, he was initially drawn to it and thought, actually, that doesn't probably look too good for us. And said, look, as soon as we got onto the runway, let's just go straight away. So we pulled onto the runway, power came on. And as we did, these guys started bouncing across the very uneven ground next to the runway. Initially to us, to our just a comical value, because I have no idea how they stayed on the back of the bikes. But yeah, they were firing with rifles at us as we were taking off along this runway in northern Nigeria. Now, I'm thankful to say nothing hit us. What was a very benign afternoon very quickly escalated into something that could have been really quite dangerous. But in hindsight, just very, very funny to look back on.
That's a great thing, the fact that you saw the humour in it, even though you were in a situation where, it could have gone catastrophically.
As quickly as these guys arrived on the bikes, it could have gone as quickly very, very wrong for us. Maybe we were lucky that day, my one experience of getting shot at was...
Humour is such a good way, isn't it, of overcoming the potentially stressful things in life. I think humour, music and laughter, those sorts of things really bring us out of those potentially stressful situations.
Well, I can certainly play the circus music to these guys bouncing along the Bondu, and we were laughing on board. So
I can picture it. It would be like a Monty Python. Anybody who remembers Monty Python. But actually, talking in terms of when your mindset and confidence really were being really stretched, is when you're in that high intense theatre of war, when you're expected to keep going, because not only were you flying an airplane, then you've got to consider the passengers and the crew members and everybody down below in terms of safety. You've got these poor buggers who are in seriously bad ways and losing their lives to consider. So how did you just tell us a little bit about that story, that you were being pushed push and push.
Yeah, this was actually a different aircraft type. We were working for a very demanding customer in the theatre. This was in Afghanistan, and we were at a time where initially doing 4-month deployments, which is quite long for aircrew to do. They tend to do shorter, but 4 months had been dictated from on high. Now, we would arrive, we'd have normally 4 or 5 crews out in the theatre at any one time, and we would predominantly be running nighttime flights in a surveillance role, flying 6 days a week, just the 1 day off. And these can be long trips, anything from 4 hours up to 8 or 9 hours, sometimes landing and going back up again. So long days. And it was a really intense period. Now, this was my first experience. I'd come straight from training on the front line. And so for me at the time, I just took it as read that, well, that's what we do in operations. We're supporting guys on the ground who are protecting people's lives. It must be extreme, but it felt extreme to me at the time after doing it for a few weeks. We talk about tiredness developing into fatigue and cumulative fatigue and how insidious it can be, and people don't recognize it in themselves or others, particularly in that environment, because you get into a group think of acceptance of what you're doing becomes normalized.
Absolutely.
And it was only really later in my first deployment when we had a change of personnel where a fresh approach came in, and these guys, what are you doing? You've pushed the boundaries and the limits of what we are allowed to do so far that we need to stop and reset back to where we were. And it was just that clarity of people coming in and seeing that. And it was only later when we had another change of the senior personnel where we stopped doing the 4-month deployments. We changed them to shorter ones, to 2 months. And then also we didn't deploy the whole pilot cadre at one go. We would swap them halfway through.
Yeah.
In an attempt to maintain that normalization and stop we would call it mission creep of pushing harder and harder and harder. Because like I said, the client we were working for, the customer, was driving that constantly. Our rest periods were not of their concern. They wanted cover when they wanted it, and it was possible to provide it. We had individuals who had come in and they wanted to, as we all do, we want to succeed. We want to be the best person or best team at providing a service or doing a job. Now, that's great, but we also have to maintain a sense of reality on the safety of situations and actually what are you achieving versus what you're risking to achieve it.
Yeah. It's such a good point. What strikes me there is the difference between looking objectively and subjectively to a situation. Of course, we're very subjective individuals. I have this concept that actually none of us are really honest. People might say, well, I'm totally honest, but we don't know because we can't actually see ourselves from a completely objective point of view. Sometimes it needs somebody to come in and just say, whoa, have you any idea where you're going collectively in this? And the social proof thing is so strong. Somebody's doing something, oh, well, that must be right. Maybe their senior got more experienced, so that's got to be right. Go down that route. And that's the mission creep, isn't it? And it can lead to something really dangerous. So what's the answer? Well, of course, self-awareness, actually choosing to take ourselves out of that situation, plonking ourselves, being the fly on the wall, looking at ourselves and thinking, okay, does this feel right? I just strip everything away. Does this feel right? Do I feel as though I'm in a safe place here? And getting you talked about the fact that, how did you do that? You spoke to a couple of people outside, get that mentorship, just talk to somebody objectively.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Excuse me. We would have various levels of experience within a deployment, as you would plan to have. And it was a case of speaking to some of these older guys who'd experienced it before and said, look, I'm new here. Is this what we do? Is this always been the case? And sometimes even with these guys, when you brought it to them in the clarity, they would go, no, actually, no, we don't do this. We shouldn't be doing this. And even those guys can be led down that path, even with that experience. Smart guys. And as soon as it was there for them, it was obvious. Whereas there are others that wouldn't listen to that. They were driven, they were going to achieve name and light success, and it would then take the group to then bring them back in these situations. But there's some real good examples, actually, safety cases of the group think.
Yes.
Very high-performing individuals, the Red Arrows, there's a number of their safety reports over the years that have cited groupthink as causal factors in events that's happened to them. Because they are a group that recruit like-minded individuals, as you'd imagine, to do the job. And as a result, they have had periods in their past, and the reports are out there, they're readily available, that say groupthink is a causal factor in why these events happen, because there was no one to break the chain.
That's really interesting, isn't it? And again, it goes back to that essential requirement for self-reflection, to be aware of where we are in any particular space, time, situation, is the self-reflection. How do we do that? Well, taking ourselves back, how does it feel? But asking somebody else, this is where the value, I think, comes in, of speaking to friends, family, but professionals. I've never been afraid to go to see somebody professional, whether it's a psychotherapist, whether it's a coach. I just see massive value in that, because it helps you to think objectively about things. And I have this real belief that we as blokes have been conditioned for all these hundreds of thousands of years to be right. And we know that the male ego basically says, well, I've got to be right and I've got to know it all. And how many times have I done that myself? I was talking about my earlier. I certainly do that with my kids and walk away and think, actually, who's been the biggest kid here? But we do that in our professional lives and our social lives and whatever. And certainly in the high intensity flight deck environment, sometimes it's amazing. And I think to myself, come on, Ben, let's get yourself sorted here. But I think, the emotional understanding of how you're feeling and what you're trying to prove versus what are you trying to learn from this situation is really valuable.
Absolutely, Ben. And I would echo those thoughts that, the ego can play such a big part in it. And I think another issue we have intertwined with the ego is that we become very task focused and we want to achieve. And therefore, we can become blinded to aspects around us when we're in those roles. And that becomes even more so when we're in stressful environments, or there is time pressures, and these all amount, and you become more sort of tunnel vision to trying to achieve something, and that accentuates the problem. And it's that ability to pause, stop, and take stock of a broader picture, even within those environments.
Yes, that's exactly it. You're effectively, the broader picture gives you that capacity to see things from a holistic point of view, rather than that pinpoint thing. And I think in terms of value, it's what can we've got to prove that we are capable of achieving something. And so we've got to do that task ourselves. And then when someone else comes to us, we try and give them advice. So we offload all this supposed experience that we've got, but actually we may not be supporting that other person, particularly because we're not giving them the ability to take the responsibility to go off in their direction as well. And so we need more. I think you can ask for advice, of course, but it's much better to find somebody who can really delve into the inside of what you're thinking, the coaching type thing to support us to come up with those answers. Otherwise, we do go down those pinpoints too quickly. Very easy tunnel vision in the aircraft.
Very easy.
Yeah, when we've been in those weather conditions coming in to land, and you're thinking, don't get low, and then you suddenly think, shit, we're getting too slow, and then you've got to come up wide and see everything together and just take a big, deep breath.
Yeah, I've heard people describe it as the helicopter approach, so removing yourself from the situation above and then taking a view over the top of it.
Yes.
Just for some clarity.
Yes, clarity is just so important, isn't it?
But it's a very difficult skill to develop and to manage, and it's something that you almost need a trigger to bring yourself back to stop a moment. Let's look at the bigger picture here. What is important? What are the different elements of this team or this environment? How are they coming together, and how do we manage it better? And don't get me wrong, I've been in a situation where it's gone badly wrong in terms of not remove myself from the situation. Even now, after years of being in the industry, you can still get too involved, but you hope to have someone in the team who will.
That's the thing, isn't it? And again, I think that's a brilliant word, trigger. What is the trigger to get us to step outside and into that helicopter mode? I mean, what would be a trigger for you? For me, for example, I know I'm 52 years old now, and I'm only just understanding this, is when I'm feeling my heartbeat rise and my breathing shallow down and my tunnel vision and my need to defend myself. That's my trigger. Okay, Ben, you're not on top of this. Yeah, you might need to be passionate. You might need to get yourself sorted out and make some big decisions here. But is this about you defending yourself and trying not to be right? And do you need to step up and take responsibility because you've got to be a leader here?
I don't know if it could be a trigger or not, Ben, but if it becomes personal, then I know that's the situation that I have to stop at that point and look at it in a bigger picture. Because rarely do people go to work to cause other people personal anguish. So if I'm taking something personally, that's not the intention of someone else or a situation. So let's work to resolve it at that point, I think but that's taken years of experience and getting it wrong to get to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't remember. There's a great picture of a crashed airplane, and experience comes from good judgment. Good judgment comes from bad experience or bad decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got to get things wrong. This is the whole thing, and this is the classic thing.
Absolutely.
The male ego. I'm talking about this, and of course, it's very easy to pinpoint labels and all the rest of it. But we are intrinsically geared towards being right, so it's very difficult we don't have value if we're wrong. And but at the end of the day, you become emotionally hijacked, and you end up metaphorically crashing yourself into the bottom of the ocean in that way. So I think you're right. When it becomes personal, there's a real clear signal. You got to step back and start to understand what's going on. What's the physiological symptoms going on in the body? Why is that? Because you're on fight and fly, limbic system, amygdala is kicking in, talking about you up against a threat here. Let's punch or kick or run away as quickly as possible, without understanding that actually that sophisticated part of our brain is saying, well, actually it's just the ego kicking in, because there is no physical threat here. You just feel as though you're being belittled or invalued by somebody, and that's got to be something you've got to deal with. And it's not somebody else that is making you feel like that, taking responsibility for your emotional reactions or emotional thoughts.
I read the chimp paradox some years ago, and I think it's the inner chimp, isn't it? That as soon as the chimps come out, you need to put them back in the box. Yeah,
exactly. Understanding. For me, I need storytelling. I think so much of us do. There's lots of abstract ideas, but I know I can feel this thing just ticking away in the back of my head here, the limbic system. Neocortex, tends to be around here. This is the sophisticated brain. So I'm saying, right, back in the box, baby, back in the box there. Let's bring you out there in the front. And that's only taken me, it's taken me 50 years until I've got to that stage. But you recognize that, don't you? Yeah. And I suppose we get to that stage now because we've got the experience. We've gone through being the student. We've gone to being the co-pilot, now we're the captain. And those early years of captaincy, I think that my ego was very much in play, trying to prove that I could do it. I was good enough to be in that seat. And I've got to the stage now where I'm much further down the line now. So I'm more relaxed about it and thinking, okay, how can I support other people who are in this situation? How would I support myself back then? If I knew now what I know, how would I support myself?
In those early days, Ben, were you trying to prove to yourself, though, rather than to other people?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So my value was placed in other people's ticks. So I needed that. Yeah, you've done a good job. And of course, we're always assessed. So we go into the simulator, we do our line training, we got all these forms all over the place officially, but we'll also get that feeling from somebody when you hit the runway. We were talking about this earlier, weren't we? How many times have you been complimented for a landing? Well, I've been thinking about that recently. I think that very few people have said to me, good landing. And is that because I'm not very good at landing? Well, the passengers are coming back. Well, it can't be that bad, probably not the best. But you think, why is that? And I will always compliment somebody, you were telling me some stories, weren't you, about the underconfident ones? What were you doing with them?
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier, and when you mentioned it, it made me immediately think there are a number of people I've flown with throughout my career who almost instinctively I would, after they landed, say, "Oh, great job, nice landing. Oh, nicely done." Just something to reinforce that they were doing it correctly. And I wouldn't do it with everyone. It became a natural response to a number of guys who were very capable but lack the confidence. The guys who take a second longer to choose a switch selection, or not quite as quick at responding to things, and it's because they're processing it or thinking. You can see it in the cockpit environment. They just needed the positive reinforcement that what they were doing was correct and they were doing it well. And I think slowly that gives people the confidence that they are in the right environment, doing the right job. Because I've been very lucky in my career that I've flown some fantastic aircraft. But by virtue of flying fantastic aircraft, they intimidate people.
Yes.
People who fly the G650 work their entire careers to get onto that jet. And it's intimidating. Not to everybody, but to some people. And it shouldn't be, because the principles are exactly the same as every other aircraft I've ever flown. But the aircraft and the job has been put on a pedestal that, similar to, I think, probably when I began my training, was an environment that I at the time didn't think I possibly should have been in. And that is how I now recognize it in other people now in the job I do.
I think it's a really good point. It's that imposter syndrome type
Correct.
thing. We want to be somewhere. As you say, you put something on the pedestal as a goal that you would really like to achieve. And if you're courageous enough to give it a go, take that first step, the excitement takes over. Let's go for it. And then when the initial level of fuel has died down, you've got to find new fuel, your motivation levels will go down, and then the imposter syndrome starts coming and knocking in, which effectively is the ego saying, well, these people are more capable, why would I be good enough? But the question is, why wouldn't we be good enough? Someone else has.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I didn't have the confidence to fly until I was 25. I thought I wasn't remotely intelligent enough to become a pilot. I talked myself out of exams and interviews, thinking somebody is going to catch me out any moment. And I did. I folded. I was telling you earlier that I didn't actually even have a full pass on my PPL the first time. I got emotionally hijacked when I came in to do my landings at the end. I tunnel vision, everything shut down. I just wanted to get on the ground and, "Mummy, come and give me a cuddle," kind of thing. I just wanted it to be over. And I got on the ground, and the examiner, lovely chap in America, just said, "What the hell was all that about?" I was like, What do you mean? Yeah, sorry, I screwed it up. He said, "No, you didn't. You got yourself in a pickle on that last bit. You're right. You go and have a bloody lesson tomorrow. I'm coming back in 2 days' time, and you're going to pass that exam. All right?" I was like, "Okay, boss." I came back, and we did that, and he just gave me a massive high five, and I thought, that's the kind of person that I need. And really, I need to be that person talking to myself in that situation.
Yeah, because the person that hijacked you was yourself.
Yeah.
And his ability to recognize that's just great instructing.
Isn't it just?
Yeah.
Again, I think once we recognize that, if we can learn that as youngsters, I've got kids, and of course we've all got people that we know much younger. I'm a coach in the cricket club as well. And you think, how can I encourage them to believe in themselves and come up with these processes, these tools to develop that can-do mindset rather than I'm going to get caught out, I'm the imposter mindset.
Yeah.
That leads to the confidence being restricted in confidence. You were telling me a great story of when you were told to grow up and not go bloody flying when you were younger. I mean, how ridiculous was that?
Well, I was going to tell you a story about when I self-sabotaged, and I'll come on to it. But yeah, I got into flying when I was at school. Where I grew up in York, RF Linton News was very close by, and you would hear the Tucanos flying around almost non-stop when I was at school. We had so many people going through training at that stage. And I'd been to the careers advisor. I guess I was, 14, 15 at the time. And I don't even think we knew it was coming. We were ushered in to see this lady, and she said, "What are you going to do?" Because every 14-year-old knows. Probably none. So I said to her, I'm going to be a pilot. And she kind of scoffed at me. And I don't remember a lot from being 14, but I remember this.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, bugger you. I am going to do that, actually, because you've just said I can't, and there's no reason why I can't at the time. So that really lit a fire in me to go and chase the dream, I guess. And then, it wasn't an easy path. My plan was to go. I didn't really fancy university. I didn't terribly enjoy academics at school. I was reasonably competent at it. I just didn't enjoy the environment. I wanted to join the Air Force straight from school. So I went to a careers interview with a former Gulf War veteran.
Wow.
From a different era of the Air Force to, I'm probably thankful to say we're in now, who absolutely grilled me in an interview on topics I'd never even considered before, and told me to go away, grow up, and come back to the Air Force when I was the right sort of stuff. And I was 18, I think, at the time, and I took a huge hit with this. Yeah. But I look back at it now, and I've never had a hard interview since, because no one's ever been anywhere near as torturous as he was. So he probably, in hindsight, did me a favour. Anyway, I did go away. I possibly grew up. I went to university, and then I went to join the Air Force afterwards. But this leads into how I self-sabotage. So whilst I was at university, I did the first flying course while doing my degree at the same time. And I finished it in 2 years because I loved the flying. So I was down there as much as I could, RAF Leeming, to do my flying, which was a great place to fly at the time because I was there in my Grob Tutor single piston. And there's Tornado F3s in the circuit and then Hawks. So it was all very exciting. So I finished my flying course in 2 years. I then had subsequently another year at university. I had to take a year. I worked in industry at Jet2, the airline, as I had a shoulder operation from an old skiing injury, classic. And then I had to do officer training. So between finishing flying and then starting flying again was 3 years. Now, I'd done well enough in my first flying course that I was streamed to the fast jet world. So I arrived at Linton News, the dream. I'm here. But I haven't flown in 3 years. I'm on a course, there are 12 of us on the course, and the rest of the guys have just arrived fresh from their first flying course, having come top of it. So their confidence is high, they're fresh from another aircraft, so their continuity is good. And then I was thrown into this environment, and I was completely out of my depth because I'd actually been away from flying longer than I had flown. I'd done 2 years of it, I had 3 years off and then came back to it, onto a brand new aircraft, which was a phenomenal uplift in terms of capability from a 180 horsepower Tutor to a 1200 shaft horsepower Tucano. Suddenly we're wearing oxygen masks and all the kits on it. The environment has changed so much. And I, despite having dreamt of being there for so long, just felt like I wasn't meant to be there. We had a great bunch of guys in the course, but I struggled through the course purely and simply through my lack of confidence and conviction in my ability to do what I was there to do. Now, I passed the course. I got my wings. It was one of the best days of my life. But it was an emotional roller coaster to achieve it, purely and simply because I didn't think I was good enough to be there. Now, I had a variety of instructors when I was there. This was a very egotistical environment. We had a lot of fast jet instructors there, and we had guys from other streams as well. Now, it was only when I look back in hindsight that I realised that actually the best instructors and the best pilots were the most relaxed guys there.
Yeah,
nothing to prove. I did my final navigation test with a Navy instructor, Sea Harrier pilot. And And he'd had a tough ride going through training as well, actually, because he initially didn't make the grade for the Sea Harrier, and he flew the Tornado F3 for a while on exchange with the Air Force to be a twin crew environment, and then latterly the Sea Harrier. So he'd seen some challenges. And I did my final navigation test with him and got the best mark on the course. So I was more than capable of doing it. But it's because the attitude he had towards it and the environment he created brought out the best in me.
Absolutely. Absolute key.
So, but I probably self-sabotaged after that. I went to Valley. I didn't make it through the course for various reasons. And it was probably only latterly when I got to the front line, and very quickly went up and took captaincy very quickly, that I realised that actually I was more than capable of doing the job. But it took me a long time to realise that. And I think probably looking back, had there been more of a mentoring role, or had I taken time to think about things myself, then it might have been different. But I was in my mid-20s and so focused on what I was trying to achieve in a very high-stress environment that there was no way I could, at the time, refocus on what it was I was doing.
Interesting, isn't it? That you mentioned the mentoring and having the right people. Again, that's another classic bloke thing. I can do it. I'm going to be the fixer. And we don't ask for support. We don't ask for help because we see it as a painful thing. But if you were back then at 23, 24, 25, as you were, and you're now 40 odd, what would you say to that person? Would you say, just, go and be on your own and work it out on your own? Or would you suggest they go and speak to somebody else?
Absolutely. A combination of both, I think, Ben, but that's an individual thing. There were certainly elements that I needed to look at from a self perspective, deal with on my own. But there were elements that, I just needed to go and ask. But at the time I was frightened to ask.
Yeah.
That's partially the environment. It's partially my own view of it. But I know so many people that I was there with at the time, now instructors that I'm still very good friends with, they would absolutely have helped at the time.
Right. Isn't it crazy?
Yeah. But like we were talking about before, I wouldn't be the person I am today if I hadn't gone through that experience. And I don't want others to go through it, because there were times when it was really, really hard. But it's made me better today. And I think it's also made me better at realizing similarities in other people when I see problems I had in the past that I can now recognize and I think try to help people with.
You're able to see, again, you're pretty tuned in. We've had plenty of conversations over the last few years. You're very tuned into trying to recognize your feelings and trying to recognize other people's feelings, which is the core context to this whole emotional thing. Is if we tune into that, it gives us much greater capacity to actually deal with our own issues and flourish, not just survive, and also to be able to bring other people into that world. And again, to counter the ego of not asking for help, thinking it's shameful. And likewise, there's plenty of times I haven't reached out to other people and just say, I'm struggling a bit here because that's not what men do, kind of thing. But it would have been so valuable, isn't it? But how does it make us individually feel when somebody comes to us and says, I'm struggling a little bit here. Have you got any advice, or I'm doing the coaching thing now. I just love it when people come to me.
Yeah, it's hugely empowering.
I tell you what to do, but I'm going to help you develop the confidence to realize the only person that's holding you back is yourself. And you've got to find your own path. You've got to find your own path. But it's wonderful when somebody comes to that. So why didn't we do other people a favor when we were younger by going and saying, sorry, but can I just ask for a little bit of support here?
Yeah, so one of the last roles I did before I left the Air Force as a secondary duty to my flying was I was a human factors and CRM instructor in the Air Force. Now, one day the Air Force are really, in a lot of ways, leading the way in this, in that they appreciate and respect how important modern day CRM is. That we do human factors training on an RAF base with everybody. Anybody that works on the base goes to human factors training.
Fantastic.
Now, this isn't to belittle any positions, but the station commander comes, but so does the person who is cleaning the squadron, or the person who restocks the vending machine. Everyone is involved in the human factors training, because the involvement of human factors isn't just on a flight deck, or just in a crew, or just on the ramp. It is so broad that everybody plays a part in the safety of flight. It's an extrapolation of the Swiss cheese model, that if you have a problem driving in your car in the morning, you can carry that all the way to the jet.
Brilliant.
And then a 12-hour down route flight, and it might still be playing on your mind. So the military have gone for it in an incredible way with the human factors. They've started working with the NHS as well, and a lot of this comes from NASA's thinking on how broad human interaction is before it interacts with the aircraft or the space shuttle or something later in the person's day or a week. Now, we've come a long way in the aviation industry from the likes of the well-cited Tenerife crash of the directive captain and the co-pilot who couldn't speak up, the first officer. And I think we're in a better place now that we certainly talk more than we used to, but there can always be more, Ben, and that's why people like yourself are so important.
I absolutely, just when you start talking from that level, it makes my heart tick. It's really, I find it really exciting. And of course, I'm passionate about it. I feel responsible for it. One of my big statistics, I heard it years ago, can't remember where, never even looked it up, was that it takes 1,000 people to make a flight mission successful. It's an extraordinary number. And you think about it, we are just the last 2 people, well, not even the last, because you've got all the air traffic controllers and all the people en route, all the flight monitoring guys are looking after us. But we are just 2 of an immense number of people who are all invested to achieve that success, to have that successful outcome. Everybody has an important part to play. If we talk to the fueler, if we take our problems from the divorce that we're having, whatever it is, argument with the children, financial problems, and start having a go at the fueler because he hasn't got enough fuel and he's got to go back and get a second truck, and then we're going to be late for the passengers. We start giving him a little bit in the neck. He's going to make some mistakes himself, and then before we know it, we've got the wrong fuel on board or whatever, however silly it is. Every single thing that we do. So this is just goes to show how incredibly important it is to build communication. How do you do that? You develop your emotional understanding of your self-awareness. You start to regulate your emotions, see how it affects other people. You start to be able to deal with conflict much better, collaborate with other people, build these wonderful relationships, just feel good about connecting with people is absolutely intrinsic, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's the power of human factors, is that it's an empowerment for everybody to speak up, because everybody looks at things differently. And it's that allows people to stop problems arising before they do. I mean, there are a number of instances on airfields when the people driving the bird scaring van, or someone delivering catering around the apron, has called and said, "I think there's a red flag hanging out that aircraft." And the aircraft goes to air traffic, the aircraft gets stopped, and the gear pin's in. And they're easy mistakes to make, Absolutely. But it's that empowerment of the broader that allows for that kind of thing to happen.
Yeah, not being shy about standing up and saying something. We're so geared towards self-consciousness of saying something. Am I going to look silly? Just, it's going to benefit anybody. So there's the whole thing about it doesn't there's nothing enlightened about shrinking. Your playing small does not serve the world. That's a thing from Marianne Williamson's poem on our deepest fear, is that we have to be bold enough. It's our responsibility to stand up and say something. But if we're doing it for the benefit of the people around us and ourselves, rather than being hijacked by our emotions, that's where we have to work out what is the motivation for saying something, and just be prepared to stand up and say something, because it could save lives, not only in our aviation environment, but just to the person walking down the road who's thinking that life is not worth continuing with, just to smile at them, just to bring them into our zone, be aware, show some compassion, empathy towards people.
Yeah. there's definite empowerment in speaking up and acknowledging that you don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
Because very few people do have all the answers.
None of us do. Einstein always said, I think Einstein, amongst others, as soon as you know something, you know nothing. Always question everything. Curiosity has its own reasons for existing. Anyway, Gav, this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation. We could go on for hours, and we will do. So you'll definitely be back on the podcast, and there's just so much we want to talk about. But just want to ask you that one last question. So Gav's 40 odd now, talking to himself when he was 23, when he had that self-sabotage moment. What would thoughtful, emotional, compassionate, empathetic Gav say to 23-year-old Gav when you were going through that original course?
It's not an easy one to answer. I would say to that guy, believe in yourself. You are able to achieve this. Get your head back in the books and go talk to some people, because that's probably the biggest one now that I realised that there were lots of people there who were willing to help, and I didn't ask.
That's a brilliant bit of advice. I think that just goes for all of us. Don't be afraid to ask for help where we need help. Yeah. Good stuff.
Oh, Ben, it's a pleasure.
I'm going to leave you because you've got the builder coming round. You've got to negotiate why the wallpaper isn't up or the paint's not on the right place. So good luck with that.
Thanks.